It's the middle of the night. You're scrolling your phone in bed like any other night. Twitter is going insane. Instagram is flooded. Your group chat is blowing up. The President of the United States posting a video, not calling a press conference, not standing at a podium with generals behind him, a video from Mar-a-Lago, and he says 6 words that stop your heart cold. A short time ago, the US began major combat operations in Iran. Just like that, the world changed. If you're watching this right now, you already know something massive just happened. But I need you to understand the full weight of what went down tonight, because this isn't just breaking news. This is a moment that your kids are going to read about in history books. Stay with me. I'm going to break down everything. What happened, why it happened, what the president actually said, and what comes next. Because this is one of those nights where the world you wake up to tomorrow will look different from the world you went to sleep in. Let's get into it. Okay, so first things first. What actually happened? In the past few hours, the United States and Israel launched a joint military strike against Iran. And I want to be very clear about what joint strike means here, because this is not the kind of quiet, behind-the-scenes coordination we've seen before. This was public, this was loud, this was deliberate. According to reports coming in from military analysts on the ground, the US used a mix of aircraft and Tomahawk cruise missiles, fired from US Navy ships positioned in the region. Let that sink in. Warships in the waters near Iran, firing cruise missiles right now. We're also hearing that this wasn't just one strike on one target. Explosions have been reported across 6 or 7 different cities inside Iran. That's not a warning shot. That's not a pinprick. That is a full-scale military campaign. Analysts who have been watching this region for decades were visibly stunned. One retired military colonel put it plainly. This is far more widespread than anything we've seen before. The targets aren't random either. We're talking about missile sites, nuclear facilities, naval bases near the Strait of Hormuz, and this is the part that really hit me, what appear to be direct strikes in Tehran itself, targeting the leadership of the Iranian regime. This is a decapitation strike. They're going after the head of the snake. And here's something that makes tonight even more historically unusual. This is happening in broad daylight. Usually, these operations happen under the cover of darkness, because darkness protects the aircraft, hides the missiles, limits civilian visibility. But tonight, cruise missiles were photographed flying low over Iraq in the daylight hours. People filmed them with their phones. The entire world watched in real time. That tells you something. This wasn't meant to be subtle. This was meant to send a message. Now, if you're a young person watching this and you're thinking, wait, when did this start? How did we get here? Let me walk you back. Because this didn't happen overnight. This has been building for decades, literally decades. The tension between the United States and Iran goes back to 1979. That's when the Iranian Revolution happened, and one of the very first things the new Islamic regime did was back the violent takeover of the US Embassy in Tehran. American citizens, diplomats, were taken hostage. 444 days they were held. 444 days. That was the beginning of a relationship defined by bloodshed, proxy wars, and mutual hatred. In 1983, Iranian-backed forces bombed the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. 241 American military personnel were killed. In 2000, Iran was linked to the attack on the USS Cole. In the wars in Iraq, Iranian forces supplied the roadside bombs, the IEDs, that killed and maimed hundreds of American soldiers. Hundreds. And more recently, Iranian proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah have launched attacks across the region. Hamas, which was armed and funded by Iran, carried out the October 7th attacks on Israel in 2023, killing over 1,000 people, including 46 Americans, and taking 12 American citizens hostage. So when President Trump stood at Mar-a-Lago tonight and listed these grievances, he wasn't making things up. This is a blood-soaked historical record. But here's where it gets really complicated for the current moment. Just last June, a few months ago, the US already struck Iran. That operation was called Operation Midnight Hammer. B-2 stealth bombers, F-22s, F-35s. They flew over Iranian airspace and hit major nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. The president declared at the time, and again just this week in the State of the Union, that Iran's nuclear program had been obliterated. Except it wasn't. Because tonight, the president stood in front of cameras and told the American people that Iran had resumed its nuclear program, that they were attempting to rebuild what was destroyed, and that they were developing long-range missiles that could soon reach Europe, and possibly the American homeland itself. Think about that. Missiles. Capable of reaching America. That is why tonight happened. But there's one more layer to this that you need to understand. Before the bombs started falling, there were 3 rounds of diplomatic talks between the US and Iranian delegations. 3 attempts to make a deal. The president spent weeks publicly demanding that Iran agree to dismantle its nuclear ambitions. He threatened military action if they didn't. He built up a massive military presence in the region as leverage. And then last night, he went public and said he wasn't happy with where negotiations were going, that they needed to make a deal and they weren't going far enough. By this morning, the bombs were falling. Now I want to spend real time on what the president actually said tonight, because this speech is extraordinary. And I don't use that word lightly. He started by saying, this regime's menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. He ran through the history I just described to you. The hostages, the Marine barracks, the USS Cole, the IEDs in Iraq. October 7th. Then he said something I want you to really hear. It's been mass terror, and we're not going to put up with it any longer. That's not diplomatic language. That's a man who has made up his mind. Then he laid out the military objectives. And this is where it gets massive in scope. He said the US is going to destroy Iran's missiles and raise their entire missile industry to the ground. He said they are going to annihilate Iran's navy. He said they will ensure that Iran's terrorist proxy network can no longer destabilize the region. And most prominently, he said Iran will never, under any circumstances, obtain a nuclear weapon. Then came the line that stopped every military analyst in their tracks. He said, and I'm going to quote this carefully, that the lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, that there may be casualties, that often happens in war. A sitting US president, publicly, on social media, warning the American people that soldiers might die in this operation. That is not something you say unless you know this is going to be long, serious, and potentially bloody. He also said, we're doing this not for now, we're doing this for the future, and it is a noble mission. For the future, not a quick operation, not a limited strike. For the future. And then, and this is the part that absolutely stunned every military analyst watching, he spoke directly to the Iranian people. He said, the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. Do you understand what he just said? The President of the United States, on a social media video, told the people of Iran to rise up and overthrow their own government once the bombs stop falling. He called it their only chance for generations. That is regime change. That is not a nuclear deal. That is not a limited strike to bring Iran back to the negotiating table. The goal, as stated by the President of the United States tonight, is the complete collapse of the Iranian regime and the installation of something new in its place. This is not a small thing. This is everything. Let's talk about the military reality of what's happening, because I think a lot of young people, myself included, don't always get this part explained in plain language. Military experts are describing it as one of the largest buildups of US military force in several decades. Almost half of all deployable US air assets have been moved into the region. Think about what that means. Half of everything America can put in the sky, positioned around Iran. But here's a fascinating wrinkle. Several of America's closest allies in the Gulf, countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, reportedly told the US that American aircraft could not launch strikes against Iran from bases on their soil. These countries host tens of thousands of US troops, but they drew the line at allowing their territory to be used as a launch pad for war with their neighbor. So what did the US do? They went naval. 2 aircraft carriers are in the region. One is in the waters south of the Persian Gulf, in the Indian Ocean. The other is in the Mediterranean Sea. These carriers are floating air bases, and they're the platforms from which much of tonight's air power is being launched. Add to that, submarines and destroyers firing Tomahawk cruise missiles, and you have a picture of a force that can project massive power without needing a single friendly base on land. Now, one of the biggest concerns military analysts have been raising for weeks is the Strait of Hormuz. This is a narrow channel of water, barely wide enough in some points, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil flows every single day. Iran has long threatened to close it if attacked. The Iranian Navy has the ability to mine the waterway, to attack tankers, to shut down the flow of oil to the global economy. That's one reason the president mentioned going after Iranian naval installations tonight. They're not just hitting nuclear sites, they're removing Iran's ability to strangle the world's oil supply in retaliation. The other massive concern is Iran's ballistic missile arsenal. Iran has thousands of missiles. They've used them before, launching massive salvos at Israel. If Iran retaliates with a full missile strike, it could mean death and destruction across Israel, across US bases, across allied countries in the Gulf. That's why US forces have been flooding the region with anti-aircraft systems, Patriot missile batteries, THAAD interceptors, Iron Dome coordination. The US and its allies are trying to build a shield in the sky before the storm arrives. Okay, I know a lot of you watching this are young. You're in your 20s, maybe late teens. You've grown up in the post-9/11 world. You've watched the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan play out your entire life. You're tired of war. A lot of Americans are tired of war. And here's the painful irony of tonight. This is a president who ran on America first, who said he didn't want to involve the US in overseas conflicts, who criticized his predecessors for endless wars. And tonight marks the 3rd time he has ordered military strikes since taking office. Nobody is celebrating this. The streets of Tel Aviv are empty. People are sheltered at home, waiting for retaliatory strikes that almost everyone agrees are coming. Iran has promised for years that any attack on their soil would be met with devastating retaliation against Israel, against US bases, against US allies. For American families tonight, there are roughly 35,000 US military personnel spread across the Middle East. Those are 35,000 sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters. The military has moved many of the most vulnerable troops out of the most exposed positions. But no one can claim there is zero risk. The president himself said so tonight. Casualties may happen. What does this mean for the economy? Already, oil markets are responding to instability in the region. If the Strait of Hormuz gets disrupted, even temporarily, gas prices spike globally. Food prices rise, supply chains get squeezed. You feel it at the pump. You feel it at the grocery store. What does this mean geopolitically? Iran is not an isolated country. It has relationships with Russia. It has relationships with China. Both of those countries have economic interests in Iran. What do they do? How do they respond? These are open questions that no one has answers to yet. And what about the Iranian people themselves? An estimated tens of thousands of Iranian civilians were killed by their own government during the protests of recent years. These are people who want freedom. They've been fighting for it at enormous personal cost. The president spoke directly to them tonight and said, "Now is your moment." But is it? Or does a foreign military attack cause Iranians to rally around their government rather than against it? That's the great unknown at the heart of tonight's operation. So where does this go from here? Every military and geopolitical expert being asked that question tonight is giving the same uncomfortable answer. We don't know. But here's what we can reasonably expect. The strikes are not over. The president made clear this is an ongoing operation. Multiple military analysts are saying this could last weeks, not days. The target list is vast. Missile sites, nuclear facilities, naval installations, and leadership targets in Tehran. Iran will retaliate. That is virtually certain. The question is how, when, and how hard. They could unleash missiles against Israel. They could attack US bases. They could activate proxy forces in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Or they could do all of the above simultaneously. Iran has spent decades building a network of militias across the region precisely for moments like this. The Iranian people face an incredible, historic, and deeply dangerous moment. If the regime's military and security apparatus gets sufficiently degraded by US and Israeli strikes, there is a real possibility of mass uprisings. Iran has had massive protests in recent years, protests that were violently suppressed with thousands killed. If those people see an opening, they may take it. That appears to be what the US is betting on. But here's the hard truth. Regime change is not a clean or quick business. History tells us that. Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. Removing a regime militarily is one thing. What comes after is always the hardest part. Nobody knows tonight how this ends, and that uncertainty, that open-endedness, is what's so heavy about this moment. Tonight is one of those nights, the kind of night where you remember exactly where you were when you found out, when you remember what you were doing when the news hit your feed, like those moments your parents talk about. Where were you when this happened, when that happened? This is your moment, and I don't mean that in an exciting way. I mean it in a serious, eyes-open, pay-attention way. Because what happens in the coming days and weeks is going to be shaped not just by generals and presidents, but by how all of us respond, how we process information, whether we seek truth or just outrage, whether we have real conversations about war, about diplomacy, about what we want the world to look like. A man told the Iranian people tonight that their hour of freedom is at hand. Whether that turns out to be true, whether this ends in liberation or in tragedy or in something no one predicted, that story is still being written. We don't know the ending yet, but we owe it to every single person whose life is on the line right now. American soldiers, Israeli civilians, Iranian families sheltering in their homes, to pay attention, to think critically, to demand accountability from our leaders, and to never forget that behind every headline there are real human beings. Stay informed, stay thoughtful, and I'll be back with updates as this situation develops. If you found this breakdown helpful, please share it with someone who needs to understand what's happening tonight. Subscribe if you haven't, because this story is just beginning.